My sister Celeste walked straight into a burning building while Navy SEALs stood frozen outside. What she did next changed everything I thought I knew about courage. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I'm Marcus Brennan, and 3 months ago I was deployed in Kuwait, scrolling through my phone during a rare break between missions. That's when my dad sent me a video that made my blood run cold. Shaky footage of smoke billowing from a 4-story apartment complex back home in Denver. Emergency vehicles everywhere, their red and blue lights cutting through the gray haze like desperate signals for help. But what stopped my heart wasn't the fire. It was seeing my little sister in the frame, her auburn hair pulled back in that same messy bun she'd worn since nursing school, standing next to our father near the fire trucks. Celeste looked so small against the chaos, clutching her medical bag with white knuckles. She was supposed to be safe at the hospital, finishing her double shift in the emergency room, not standing in a parking lot watching flames devour a building. See, Celeste has always been the careful one in our family. While I was jumping off garage roofs and racing motorcycles through mountain trails, she was studying anatomy textbooks and following every rule in the book. She became a nurse because she wanted to save lives, but she'd always done it from behind the safety of hospital walls, with backup and equipment and protocols to follow. Our dad, Gordon Brennan, spent 30 years as a fire chief before retiring. He raised us both to respect fire, to understand that courage without caution gets people killed. Never be a hero, he'd tell us growing up. Be smart, be prepared, and trust your training. Celeste took those words to heart more than anyone. That's why seeing her at that fire scene felt wrong, like watching a surgeon operate without gloves. Celeste didn't chase danger. She was the one who made me text her when I landed safely after every mission, who sent care packages filled with medical supplies, because she worried I wasn't taking care of myself properly. She was cautious, methodical, someone who color-coded her medical charts and always had 3 backup plans. But there she was, setting up what looked like a makeshift medical station in the apartment complex parking lot. Even through my dad's unsteady phone camera, I could see her moving with that focused precision she'd learned in the ER. She was laying out supplies on a folding table, checking equipment, preparing for whatever casualties might come out of that building. I remember thinking this was typical Celeste behavior. She'd driven across town on her day off because she heard they might need medical help, and she'd stay safely in that parking lot treating minor smoke inhalation and scraped knees until the real firefighters handled the dangerous work. She'd go home that night with that quiet satisfaction she always got from helping people, probably not even mentioning it when we talked later. What I didn't know was that someone Celeste loved like family was trapped on the 4th floor of that burning building. Someone who had helped raise her after our mom died when she was 12. Someone who was running out of time while trained Navy SEALs stood outside, calculating risks and declaring the rescue impossible. What I didn't know was that in about 10 minutes, my careful, rule-following sister would make a decision that would leave those SEALs speechless and change how I understood what real courage looks like. Because sometimes the people you think need protecting turn out to be the bravest ones of all. To understand what happened that day, you need to know who Celeste really is. My sister has this way of tilting her head slightly when she's processing medical information, like she's downloading everything into perfect mental files. She's the person who can spot a heart murmur from across a crowded emergency room, who remembers every patient's name weeks after they've been discharged, who still keeps handwritten notes because she says typing feels too impersonal. But she's also the person who checks her car locks 3 times before walking into a store, who researches every restaurant's health inspection scores before eating there, who carries backup phone chargers and first aid kits everywhere she goes. Celeste doesn't just prepare for emergencies, she lives like one might happen at any moment. That Tuesday started like any other for her. Celeste had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift at Mercy General, dealing with everything from car accident victims to a toddler who'd swallowed magnetic beads. She was exhausted, running on her 4th cup of coffee and whatever energy bars she kept stashed in her locker. Most people would have gone straight home to crash, but Celeste never could shake off a tough shift that easily. She was driving home through downtown Denver when she heard the sirens. Not unusual in a city, but these weren't the standard ambulance wails she'd grown used to. These were the deep, urgent horns of fire trucks, lots of them, all heading in the same direction. Celeste's training kicked in automatically. She pulled over, grabbed her personal medical kit from the trunk, and followed the sound. The Riverside Gardens apartment complex had been her home briefly during nursing school, back when she couldn't afford anything better. She knew those narrow hallways, the temperamental elevator that only worked half the time, the way sound carried through the thin walls. It was a building full of working families, elderly folks on fixed incomes, college students scraping by just like she had. Good people who deserved better than what they could afford. When Celeste arrived at the scene, she found controlled chaos. Fire trucks formed a semicircle around the building's front entrance, their ladders extended like mechanical arms reaching toward the smoke-filled windows. Police had cordoned off the area, directing evacuated residents toward a temporary shelter set up in the nearby park. The air tasted of ash and fear. That's when she spotted our father. Gordon Brennan stood near the incident command vehicle, his silver hair reflecting the emergency lights. Even in retirement, he carried himself like the fire chief he'd been for 3 decades. His broad shoulders and weathered hands told stories of countless emergencies, of decisions made in seconds that saved or lost lives. The other firefighters still deferred to his experience, seeking his opinion even though he no longer wore the badge. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Celeste approached him with that mixture of concern and affection she'd always shown him since Mom died. "They called me in as volunteer coordinator," Gordon replied, his voice carrying that steady calm he'd perfected over years of crisis management. "Need someone to organize the civilian response. What about you, sweetheart? Shouldn't you be home sleeping off that double shift?" Celeste gestured toward the organized chaos around them. Heard the sirens, thought maybe they could use medical support. She was already scanning the area, identifying where she could set up a triage station, calculating what supplies she'd need. Gordon smiled, the proud expression he'd worn since she graduated nursing school. "Course you did. Come on, let's get you set up properly." Working together felt natural, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. Gordon helped Celeste establish a medical station in the apartment complex's parking lot, far enough from the building to be safe, but close enough to treat anyone who came out needing immediate care. She arranged her supplies with that meticulous precision she'd inherited from him, everything labeled and accessible. "Most of the residents got out clean," Gordon explained as they worked. "Few cases of minor smoke inhalation, couple of scraped knees from people rushing down the stairs, nothing you can't handle." Celeste nodded, pulling on latex gloves and checking her equipment one final time. This was familiar territory for her, providing medical care while other people handled the dangerous work. She was good at this, comfortable in her role as the person who fixed what others broke or burned or damaged. What neither of them knew was that not everyone had made it out clean. What they didn't know was that someone who'd helped shape Celeste into the caring person she'd become was still inside that building, trapped and running out of time. What they didn't know was that everything they'd taught each other about caution and preparation was about to be tested in ways neither of them had ever imagined. For the first 20 minutes, everything went according to plan. Celeste treated 3 residents for minor smoke inhalation, bandaged up a woman who'd scraped her arm rushing down the emergency stairs, and helped calm a young father whose toddler was crying from all the sirens. Standard emergency response, the kind of organized chaos both she and Gordon knew how to navigate. The fire department had the blaze mostly contained to the 2nd and 3rd floors. Residents were accounted for, gathered safely in the park across the street. The building would be a total loss, but everyone was alive, and that's what mattered. Celeste was already mentally preparing to pack up her supplies when she heard Fire Captain Torres speaking into his radio. "Command, we've got a problem. Building resident count doesn't match our evacuation numbers." Gordon's head snapped up from the clipboard he'd been checking. "What do you mean doesn't match?" Torres walked over, his face grim beneath the helmet. "Building manager says Mrs. Valencia Rodriguez, apartment 4B, isn't with the other residents. 82 years old, severe arthritis, uses a walker. None of the neighbors remember seeing her come down. The name hit Celeste like a physical blow. Mrs. Rodriguez. Valencia Rodriguez, who'd lived in apartment 4B for 15 years, who'd babysat Celeste during her senior year of nursing school when money was too tight for proper daycare. Mrs. Rodriguez, who taught Celeste how to make authentic tamales and always kept extra groceries in case her nursing student girl was too broke to eat properly. "Are you sure she's still inside?" Gordon asked, but even as he spoke, his eyes were scanning the fourth-floor windows. That's when they all saw it. A shadow moving behind the smoke-stained glass of 4B's living room window. A small figure pressing against the glass, trying to get someone's attention. "There," Celeste pointed, her voice tight. "Fourth floor, corner apartment, that's her." Tors immediately radioed for the ladder truck, but when it positioned itself beneath the window, the hydraulics failed. The ladder extended halfway and stopped, mechanical whining filling the air as the operator tried desperately to coax it higher. Emergency backup was 20 minutes away, minimum. "What about the interior stairwell?" Gordon asked. "Compromised," Tors replied. "Structural collapse on the third-floor landing. Stairs from 3 to 4 are completely blocked. No way up from the inside." That's when Commander Hayes and his team arrived. The Navy SEALs were conducting urban rescue training exercises at the military base outside Denver. When the emergency call went out for specialized rescue assistance, they'd been dispatched immediately. Hayes was a 15-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and the kind of calm competence that comes from pulling people out of impossible situations in war zones around the world. Celeste watched as Hayes and his team rapidly assessed the building. They moved with military precision, testing structural integrity points, measuring smoke density, calculating heat levels and oxygen displacement. These were men trained to extract hostages from terrorist compounds and rescue downed pilots from enemy territory. After 10 minutes of evaluation, Hayes approached the incident command. "Building structure is severely compromised," he reported to Tors and Gordon. "Internal temperatures on the fourth floor are approaching 800 degrees. Smoke density indicates oxygen displacement of roughly 60% in that corridor. Any rescue attempt would be extremely high risk." "What does that mean in plain English?" Gordon asked, though from his expression he already knew. "It means the building could collapse if we add weight to the compromised support structures. It means visibility is zero and breathable air is almost gone. It means even with full gear, we'd be operating beyond acceptable risk parameters." Through it all, Celeste kept her eyes on that fourth-floor window. Mrs. Rodriguez was still there, still moving, but more slowly now. The smoke was getting thicker. "How long does she have?" Celeste asked quietly. Hayes looked up at the window, his professional composure flickering for just a moment. "In those conditions, maybe 3 minutes before smoke inhalation becomes fatal." That's when the pieces fell into place for Celeste. This wasn't just any elderly resident trapped in a burning building. This was Valencia Rodriguez, who'd held Celeste's hair back when she was sick with the flu during finals week, who'd made extra batches of homemade soup because she knew nursing students lived on ramen noodles and determination, who'd sat with Celeste for hours after her first patient died, explaining that caring too much wasn't a weakness, it was what made her a good nurse. Mrs. Rodriguez had been there when Celeste needed someone most, after their mother died and Gordon was working overtime to keep the family afloat. She'd filled some of that maternal void without being asked, simply because she saw a young woman who needed guidance and love. "There has to be something we can do," Celeste said, her voice stronger now. Commander Hayes shook his head. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've pulled people out of buildings in Baghdad that were hit by mortar fire. I've extracted wounded soldiers from structures that were barely standing. I'm telling you, this rescue isn't possible without extreme risk of additional casualties. So we just watch her die." The words came out sharper than Celeste intended. Gordon placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Celeste, I know this is hard, but Hayes is right. We can't risk more lives, even for someone we care about." But Celeste was no longer listening to their professional assessments and calculated risks. She was remembering Mrs. Rodriguez teaching her to braid friendship bracelets the week after the funeral, her patient hands guiding Celeste's shaking fingers. She was remembering the way Mrs. Rodriguez always made extra meals on Sundays, showing up at their door with containers of food because she cooked too much again. Mrs. Rodriguez had never had children of her own, but she'd chosen to love Gordon's kids like they were hers. She'd chosen to be family when they desperately needed one. Above them, the shadow in the window was moving more slowly. Mrs. Rodriguez was running out of time, and the people trained to save her were standing in a parking lot talking about acceptable risk parameters. That's when Celeste realized something that would change everything. Sometimes love doesn't calculate risks. Sometimes it just acts. What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. While Commander Hayes was explaining to my father why a rescue was impossible, Celeste was doing what she'd always done best. She was problem-solving. I watched this part later on security footage from the building across the street. You can see Celeste step away from the group, her head tilted in that familiar way, processing information. She wasn't looking at the fourth-floor window anymore. She was studying the building's structure, tracing lines with her eyes along the fire escapes and exterior walls. That's when she walked directly up to Commander Hayes. "I know this building," she said, interrupting his conversation with the fire captain. "I lived here for 8 months during nursing school. There's a service corridor that runs along the back of the building, connects to the maintenance room on each floor." Hayes looked at her with the patient expression of someone who dealt with well-meaning civilians before. "Ma'am, I appreciate the information, but even if that corridor exists, the structural integrity issues remain the same." "But it doesn't," Celeste pressed on. "That corridor was built as an afterthought in the 1980s when they added the laundry facilities. It's separately supported, doesn't connect to the main load-bearing walls that are compromised. The maintenance room on the 4th floor shares a wall with Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen." Gordon stepped closer to his daughter. "Celeste, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking someone small enough could get through that corridor, reach the maintenance room, and break through the shared wall into her apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez has severe arthritis and uses a walker. She can't move quickly or navigate debris. Someone would need to carry her out." The silence that followed was deafening. Hayes stared at Celeste like she'd just suggested flying to the moon. "Ma'am, even if that corridor is structurally sound, which is a big if, the heat levels and smoke density would still be lethal. You're talking about entering a building where internal temperatures are approaching 800 degrees. "Not in the corridor," Celeste replied, her voice gaining confidence. "The service corridor has its own ventilation system, remember. It was always cooler back there, even in summer. And if the fire is contained to floors 2 and 3 like you said, the corridor route bypasses the worst of it." Hayes shook his head firmly. "I can't authorize a civilian to attempt something my trained team won't risk." That's when Gordon surprised everyone, including me when I heard this story later. "She's not wrong about the building layout," my father said slowly. "I've been in that structure for fire inspections. The service corridor is built differently than the rest of the building. It might be viable." "Dad, you can't be serious," Torres interjected. But Gordon was looking at his daughter with an expression I'd seen before, back when she was 12, and insisted on helping him inventory medical supplies for the fire department. Pride mixed with worry, love mixed with respect for her capabilities. "Celeste knows that building better than anyone here. She's also small enough to navigate tight spaces, medically trained to assess Mrs. Rodriguez's condition, and strong enough to carry an elderly woman if necessary." "This is insane," Hayes said. "I've got 15 years of special operations experience, and I'm telling you this rescue isn't feasible." Celeste looked up at the 4th floor window where Mrs. Rodriguez's shadow was barely visible now. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but there was something different in it, something I'd never heard before. "Commander, with respect, you're thinking like a soldier. You're calculating acceptable losses and mission parameters. But Mrs. Rodriguez isn't a mission objective to me. She's the woman who taught me that family isn't just about blood. She's the reason I became a nurse instead of dropping out when things got too hard." She turned to include both Hayes and Gordon in her gaze. You want to know what's insane? Standing here with the knowledge and ability to save someone I love while she dies 50 feet away, because the risk assessment doesn't look good on paper. Hayes studied Celeste for a long moment. You understand that if you're wrong about that corridor, if the structure fails or the heat levels are higher than you think, you'll die in there. And if I'm right, Mrs. Rodriguez lives to make tamales for her neighbors again. That's when my father did something that still amazes me. Gordon Brennan, who'd spent 30 years preaching caution and following protocol, who'd taught both his children that heroics get people killed, looked at his daughter and nodded. If we're doing this, we do it right, he said. No improvised gear, no rushing in unprepared. The next 10 minutes were controlled chaos. Hayes, despite his reservations, helped jerry-rig protective equipment. They soaked construction worker coveralls in water, fitted Celeste with a hard hat and emergency oxygen mask, and rigged a rope system around her waist connected to a secure anchor point. The rope gives you 8 minutes of slack, Hayes explained as they fitted the harness. Any longer and the heat exposure becomes critical even with protection. Gordon tested the radio system they'd wired into Celeste's helmet. You maintain constant contact. Any sign of structural compromise, any indication the corridor isn't viable, you abort immediately. Celeste nodded, but I could tell from her expression that aborting wasn't really an option in her mind. Not with Mrs. Rodriguez still moving behind that window. One more thing, Hayes said as they finished the preparations. If you find her unconscious or unresponsive, you don't try to revive her in there. You get her out first, medical attention second. Understood. Understood. That's when Celeste pulled out her phone and called me. 6,000 miles away in Kuwait, I answered expecting our usual check-in conversation. Instead, I saw my sister's face framed by emergency lights and smoke. Marcus, I need you to know something, she said, her voice clear despite the chaos around her. Mrs. Rodriguez is trapped in there and I'm going to get her out. Celeste, what are you talking about? Where are you? If something goes wrong, if this doesn't work out the way I'm planning, I need you to understand that I chose this. Mrs. Rodriguez chose to love our family when she didn't have to. She was there for us when Mom died, when Dad was working too much, when I didn't know how to be strong enough for everything life was throwing at us. I could see Gordon and Hayes in the background, making final adjustments to her gear. She taught me what it means to choose family, Marcus. Now it's my turn to choose her. The call ended before I could respond. 3 minutes later, my sister disappeared into a burning building while Navy SEALs watched from the parking lot, and I sat in a military base halfway around the world, powerless to do anything but wait. The first 30 seconds after Celeste disappeared into that service corridor were the longest of Gordon's life. He stood next to Commander Hayes, both men staring at the building's rear entrance where she'd vanished, waiting for her voice to crackle through the radio. I'm in, came Celeste's voice, slightly muffled by the oxygen mask but clear enough. Corridor is intact. Temperatures manageable so far, moving toward the stairwell. Hayes checked his stopwatch. Roger that, you have 7 minutes 30 seconds remaining. What none of them knew was that Celeste had been right about the corridor's structure, but wrong about one crucial detail. The service corridor wasn't empty. Dad, I've got a problem here. Her voice came through the radio, tension creeping in for the first time. What kind of problem? Gordon responded immediately. There's someone else in this corridor. Male, maybe 60 years old, maintenance uniform. He's conscious but disoriented, looks like smoke inhalation. Hayes and Gordon exchanged glances. This wasn't part of the plan. Can you get around him? Hayes asked. Negative. He's blocking the path to the 4th floor access, and he's too confused to move on his own. I think he got lost trying to evacuate and ended up back here. The radio crackled with silence for a moment before Celeste's voice returned. I'm going to have to bring him with me. Absolutely not, Hayes responded immediately. Your gear isn't designed for 2 people, and you don't have the physical capacity to carry 2 victims out. Then I guess we better hope Mrs. Rodriguez can still walk. What happened next, I pieced together later from Celeste's own account and the testimony of the maintenance worker, Roberto Vega. Celeste helped Roberto to his feet and basically dragged him up the service stairwell to the fourth floor. The man was semi-conscious, breathing heavily from smoke inhalation, but aware enough to follow her directions. "Stay close to me," she told him as they reached the fourth-floor maintenance room. "We're going to get Mrs. Rodriguez, and all three of us are walking out of here together." The maintenance room was exactly as Celeste remembered it, a cramped space filled with pipes and electrical panels. The shared wall with Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen was thin drywall, just as she'd hoped. But when she started kicking through it, she discovered something that changed everything. "Dad, you're not going to believe this." Celeste's voice came through the radio, breathless from exertion. "What is it?" Gordon asked, checking his watch. They were at the 5-minute mark. "Mrs. Rodriguez isn't alone in here. There's a kid with her, maybe 16 years old. They're both conscious, but the boy looks worse off than she does." Through the hole in the wall, Celeste could see Mrs. Rodriguez sitting in her kitchen chair, holding a wet towel over the face of a teenage boy who was lying on her linoleum floor. The elderly woman looked up when Celeste appeared. "Mija, thank God," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice hoarse but strong. "This boy, Danny, he came looking for Roberto when the fire started, got trapped when the stairwell collapsed." That's when Celeste understood what had really happened. Roberto Vega hadn't gotten lost during evacuation. He'd gone back into the building looking for Danny Castellanos, a teenager who lived on the 3rd floor and worked part-time helping with building maintenance. When the stairwell collapsed, Roberto had gotten trapped in the service corridor while Danny had somehow made it to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez, instead of trying to escape on her own, had stayed to take care of the boy. "How long has he been unconscious?" Celeste asked, climbing through the hole in the wall and immediately checking Danny's pulse and breathing. "On and off for the last few minutes. He keeps trying to get up, says he needs to find his grandfather." Celeste looked around the apartment. Smoke was thick, but not overwhelming, thanks to wet towels Mrs. Rodriguez had stuffed around the door cracks. The elderly woman had created a makeshift safe room and was doing her best to keep the teenager alive. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we need to go now. Can you walk?" "She, Mija, but the boy, he's too weak. And Roberto, where is Roberto?" "Roberto's with me, he's okay. But I need your help. Danny's going to have to go first." That's when Mrs. Rodriguez did something that left Celeste speechless. "No, Mija, take the boy. He has his whole life ahead of him. I'm an old woman." "We're all leaving together," Celeste said firmly. "That's not negotiable." The radio crackled with Hayes' voice. 2 minutes remaining, status report." Celeste looked at Danny, who was barely conscious, at Mrs. Rodriguez with her walker and arthritic joints, and at the hole in the wall that led back to Roberto in the service corridor. 4 people, 2 minutes, and a route that was designed for 1. That's when she made a decision that would haunt and inspire her for the rest of her life. "Change of plans," she radioed back. "I'm bringing all 3 out through the fire escape." "Negative, the fire escape structure is compromised," Hayes responded. "Not the main fire escape. There's an emergency ladder on the back of the building that connects to the service corridor. It's older, but it's built into the brick structure, not attached to the compromised steel framework." What Celeste was describing was basically a maintenance ladder that building workers used to access the roof. It wasn't designed for evacuation, but it was their only option for getting everyone out quickly. "Celeste, that's not safe for civilians," Gordon's voice cut through the static. "Dad, nothing about this is safe. But Mrs. Rodriguez didn't leave Danny behind, and I'm not leaving any of them behind." 4 agonizing minutes later, movement appeared at the 3rd-floor emergency access window. Hayes had positioned himself with binoculars and was calling out positions. "I see them, 4 figures. Celeste is helping someone through the window, looks like the teenager." Then Mrs. Rodriguez appeared, moving slowly but steadily with her walker. Then Roberto, supporting himself against the wall but mobile. Finally, Celeste emerged, her coveralls torn and her face streaked with soot but very much alive. They all made it down that maintenance ladder one by one, with Celeste going last to make sure everyone was safely on the ground before she descended. When Commander Hayes reached them in the parking lot, all four were conscious and breathing. Danny needed immediate medical attention for smoke inhalation. Roberto was dehydrated and disoriented, but Mrs. Rodriguez was asking if anyone had called Danny's grandfather to let him know the boy was okay. Hayes looked at Celeste, this small-town nurse who just accomplished what his team had declared impossible. "In 15 years of special operations, I've never seen civilian courage like that," he said quietly to Gordon. "Your daughter didn't just save lives today, she showed us what real bravery looks like." But the most important words came from Mrs. Rodriguez as the paramedics were checking her over. "Mija," she said, grabbing Celeste's hand, "I knew you'd come. Family always comes for family." 6 months later, I'm sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's new apartment watching her teach Danny Castellanos how to make tamales for his girlfriend's birthday. The kid who was barely conscious on her kitchen floor is now a high school graduate heading to community college in the fall, and he still comes by every Sunday to help with grocery shopping and yard work. Roberto Vega recovered fully from his smoke inhalation and went back to work maintaining buildings around Denver. But now, he carries emergency communication devices and has evacuation plans memorized for every structure he services. He also never misses one of Mrs. Rodriguez's Sunday dinners, claiming her cooking is better medicine than anything the hospital gave him. As for Celeste, she suffered minor smoke inhalation and some scrapes from climbing through that maintenance room wall, but she was back at work within a week. The physical recovery was easy. The emotional transformation took longer to understand. 3 days after the fire, Celeste called me from her apartment, and I could hear something different in her voice. Stronger, but also more thoughtful. "Marcus, I keep thinking about what Commander Hayes said about real bravery. I don't think what I did was brave. I think it was just necessary." "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Rodriguez didn't calculate risks when she stayed to help Danny. Roberto didn't run cost-benefit analyses when he went back looking for that kid. They just saw people they cared about who needed help, and they acted. That's not bravery, that's just love doing what love does." But the real change in Celeste became clear 2 weeks later when she signed up for emergency rescue training with the Denver Fire Department. Not to become a firefighter, but to bridge the gap between medical response and emergency rescue that she discovered in that burning building. "I realized something in there," she told Gordon as they filled out her training paperwork together. "All my medical knowledge didn't matter if I couldn't reach the people who needed help, and all the rescue training in the world doesn't help if you can't provide proper medical care once you get them out." Gordon watched his daughter with the same pride I'd seen when she graduated nursing school, but there was something else in his expression now. Respect. He was looking at her not as the careful child he'd raised, but as a professional colleague who'd proven herself under pressure. "You know, when I was fire chief, we always talked about acceptable losses," he said. "Sometimes you can't save everyone and you have to make peace with that reality. But watching you in there, seeing what you accomplished, I realized I'd been thinking about it all wrong." "How so?" "Maybe the question isn't whether we can accept losing people. Maybe the question is whether we've tried everything possible to save them." That conversation led to something I never saw coming. Gordon came out of retirement to help develop new protocols for civilian-involved emergency rescues. He and Celeste started working together, training paramedics and nurses in basic rescue techniques while teaching firefighters advanced medical response. Their program now operates in 6 states, and it's called the Rodriguez Protocol, named after the woman whose situation created it. But the most important change wasn't professional, it was personal. Our family dinners, which had always been quiet affairs where we caught up on work and weather, became something different. We started talking about what matters, about the people we'd choose to risk everything for, about the difference between being careful and being afraid. Mrs. Rodriguez became our unofficial 4th family member. She moved into a ground-floor apartment 3 blocks from Celeste's place, and every Sunday she cooks enough food for whoever needs it. Danny brings his girlfriend, Roberto brings his grandchildren, sometimes Commander Hayes stops by when he's in town. "Family takes care of family," she always says when people thank her. And sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places. Hayes still talks about that day whenever he's training new SEALs. He uses it as an example of how civilian courage can teach military professionals about mission priorities. We calculated risks, he tells them. She calculated love. In that situation, love was the better strategy. But the lesson that stuck with me most came from a conversation I had with Celeste during my next leave home. We were sitting in that same apartment complex parking lot, now rebuilt and reopened, watching kids play on the new playground. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd been wrong?" I asked her. "If the corridor had collapsed, if the heat had been too intense, if you died in there?" Celeste was quiet for a long time, watching a little girl teach her younger brother how to swing. "I think about it every day," she finally said. "But I also think about what would have happened if I'd been right about the risks and wrong about what mattered. If I'd spent the rest of my life knowing I chose safety over love when it really counted." She looked at me with that same steady expression she'd had on the phone that day. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't just help raise me after Mom died. She showed me what it looks like to choose people over protocol, to make family out of whoever needs one. Standing in that parking lot, listening to professionals explain why saving her was impossible, I realized I had a choice. I could be the person who follows rules, or I could be the person who follows love. And you chose love. I chose family, and it turns out family doesn't just take care of you. Sometimes it teaches you who you really are when everything else falls away. 6 months later, Danny graduated valedictorian of his high school class. Roberto's grandson learned to make Mrs. Rodriguez's famous salsa recipe. Celeste became the youngest person ever certified in emergency medical rescue in Colorado. And I learned something watching from 6,000 miles away, then hearing the story over and over again during family dinners and training seminars and quiet conversations between siblings. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's Mrs. Rodriguez refusing to abandon a teenager when she could have saved herself. It's Roberto going back into a burning building to look for a kid who wasn't even his family. It's my sister walking into flames because love demanded it, and sometimes that's the only calculation that matters. Sometimes the people you think you're protecting end up being the ones who teach you what strength really looks like. Sometimes family finds you in a burning building, and sometimes you have to walk through fire to find it. But mostly I learned that when love calls, you don't count the cost. You just answer.